think that we are highlighting, wow, I'm going to restart that. We're highlighting, that was really mean, really mean.
All right, we're restarting.
Totally distracted me.
I know I did. That's fun. Whenever you're ready.
Wow, wow, I got that wow, wow. Anything that I want, I'ma get it now. Yeah, wow, wow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clickworthy Convos podcast, brought to you by The Marketing Perspective, where we challenge the usual marketing playbook and talk about what actually works. We're your hosts, Maureen, Mo, Connors, and Michaela, MD, Klein. Let's talk about the messy truth behind marketing workflows and why they might be doing more harm than good. So maybe we could start out and talk a little bit about why workflows have come about.
That was so beautifully said. I think we should go back TBT to our very first episode. You had a mic drop moment. I don't remember if you remember it, but it was something along the lines of, you are a victim of the workflow that you adopt, or something along those lines. I feel like we should start there. What was your train of thought?
I think you come up with a marketing workflow to improve your business processes. And I think they come from a good place. Rather than relying on email, you want to very quickly be able to say, a marketing workflow does this. Like, here's the CTA I'm talking about. You want to update this. Once you and the creatives get into a good space, you want to be able to get it into their inbox exactly when they need it. They can get pings. You can track it. You can evidence it. You want to be able to get it through your review teams, whether that's, business stakeholders who need to review, or, your legal and compliance teams, or something like that. Like, I think workflows come from a good place of what you think about, which is improving efficiency. Michaela, you're on vacation. If I had an email and I just sent an email to you, it could sit in your inbox, right? Where a workflow, it could pass on to somebody on your team or something like that. I do believe workflows have their space, but I think there's a problem when we almost take the humans out of the workflow and we're just pounding our keyboards rather than creating a process that works.
Hundo P, I think there is definitely a very fine line between a good process and intentional process, because as much as I hate process, there is a need for some, but there's a very fine line between what is too much and then when does it become the process is just figuring out the process. I've been there too many times and it drives me bananas.
Right. Or because you have a workflow where you can add people, suddenly you have 17 approvers on something, right? And so it goes from me, who submits a creative brief, to the head of brand who reads the creative brief, who then gives it to the creative, who then gives it to the copy, and then it goes back and forth. And then when you want to approve it, it goes to your stakeholder, it goes to your stakeholder's boss, it then goes to the head of brand, and then it goes to, the head of copy, the head of design, right? It goes to legal, it goes to compliance, it goes to the segment owner or product owner, right? And suddenly there you've taken everything out of it. That takes the purpose of a workflow, which is create efficiency, and actually infuses such a major level of inefficiency that it creates frustration with your marketing team. It waters down your marketing. And overall, you're going to wind up with less productive marketing results because you've built a process that is just counteracting all of your good intentions.
Right. I mean, I think in those instances, everybody's working within their own process that they think works, and then no one is talking, no one's connected. So it almost pushes you into these silos where it's just so disjointed and no one's happy with the work at the end of the day. And that's where you end up butting heads and disconnecting, not having the same vision, and ultimately not even knowing what you're working towards or working on. Everything gets lost in this mess of cluster F.
I think the other thing is workflows allow people to have, I want to say, an overreach into what their purview is, right? So if I'm sitting in the seat of the product owner, I should be commenting on the accuracy of the product statements, right? I shouldn't be commenting on the CTA. I shouldn't be commenting on an image. I shouldn't be commenting on those things. If I am legal and compliance, right, I shouldn't be commenting on anything that doesn't raise a red flag to me, either from a regulatory or a legal perspective. But I think everyone gets in and tries to play copywriter, right? And that's where you start to get conflicting feedback, which happens a lot of times in a workflow. And then how do you figure that out, right? You get confusion over what's mandatory feedback versus what is optional, right? Or suggested, if you will. And I think like that is another piece that really, really hinders workflows, because what you've submitted from a creative, once it goes through 3 or 4 people, suddenly it's been rewritten so much, it may no longer make sense. It may have diverted you unintentionally from the original topic or purpose of the email. And that is where you need to be really careful with the workflows.
Well, and then whose notes do you take, right? And I've never personally understood the commentary from different angles, like compliance, commenting on a layout or an image or something like that. Why do you even want to? Like, are you not so busy focusing on your own job? Like, I don't even have time to think about anything else. Like, I don't want to go and play compliance cop. It's almost just like I've never understood why people go outside of their lanes when they have so much to do. Like, just focus on the thing that you need to do, and then it would be so much easier. But that's not the world we live in. So
people want to feel like they've contributed. Having worked in workflows before and been looking at them, sometimes I feel like, oh gosh, I actually don't have any changes to this. Something must be wrong, right? Like I should have input. I should have a change. And I feel like we are just programmed almost to want to comment, to want to have our input on something because we're being asked to approve it, right? And so you almost want to put your stamp on it when in reality, if it's fine, it's fine. It's good marketing. If we're doing things right, and we're doing things in the manner, and we've kind of prepared our brand guidelines, our marketing and messaging along the same lines, like most people shouldn't have any comments.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love that. And I think that's a great perspective and lens to think through of like, if you feel like you're not commenting, you're not doing your job.
Which I do think is how, work and ideas start to get diluted. I think there's one other danger with workflows. Now, the dilution is that as well, but I also think it's start to build these silos of teams because you've taken a bit of that human element, and everybody can be like a keyboard commando or whatever it is, right? You could give your harshest criticism in, behind a keyboard, and maybe you wouldn't have done that face to face, but I think it exacerbates silos, especially when we think about remote organizations, right? Where people aren't walking to the desk next door. Workflows create even more silos, and they prevent those conversations that you should be having.
Even starting as early as the brief. If your creative brief is so overcomplicated, I remember we worked in like a 3-page brief. People don't want to we don't need all that. Like we need the essential information. So it's almost like hit it with the simple stick and simplify it down to the key information that people really need, because then as a stakeholder or someone submitting a brief, I'm more likely to do a good job filling that out versus duplicating the last one, copy and pasting just to check the box. And then that creates a lot of irritation and friction. And like, this brief doesn't make sense. The KPIs and metrics match up with something else. And it's like, why? All because we just overcomplicate everything. Keeping things simple really is the key to success.
I mean, I think that could be a really good podcast, which is what's an effective creative brief, right? I do think we have a tendency to overcomplicate them. And I think that's right. And especially when you're just dumping a brief into a workflow, you would never do that with an agency. You would always meet with your agency. You would send them the brief. They would read it. They would come back with questions. You would do a kickoff. We don't do that often enough with our internal teams and our workflows.
Again, goes back to our first episode. There was a line in the sand, and you and I had never really spoken or even engaged with each other. And you were just coming from behind the keyboard, and I'm like, hey, lady.
Coming in hot.
Yeah. Who are you? But, once we started having conversations, I understood exactly where you were coming from. But it's that back and forth of just the workflow and the process. And I think that's kind of why we threw out the process and we said, you know what? We're going to do things different and we're going to do things that work.
We're going to start over again a little bit and we're going to.
I love that though. Sometimes you have to break things down to build them up and make them better.
One of the things that you just made me think about, though, is when we were having those struggles, I remember getting comment or getting creative from you and being like, who's Michaela? No announcement, no anything. Like, hey, they'll be handling your creative. Like, no meeting setup of, hey, here's some of your key stakeholders, or here's the team that's going to be working on your stuff. That's a problem too. If there's somebody new that's coming into the workflow, there is a responsibility of like, hey, these are the main submitters. These are the people you should go out. You should ask them what's working, what's not working, like what they want from the creative process. And on our side, hey, we have a new creative. Are you interested in meeting with them and talking to them a little bit about what's going on and the type of creative you're receiving and your preferences? Otherwise, somebody shows up with comments and you're just like, who is this person? Why are they commenting?
That was something that I definitely initiated myself because that wasn't something that happened. And it was just like, okay, I need to get to the bottom of what's going on, why it's not working, where are the friction points, and get an understanding of like the landscape that I'm walking into here, because it felt like I was kind of walking into a minefield of like nobody was happy with one another. We had people coming at each other from behind keyboards, and you were a scary lady. I was just like, holy smokes. I was just like, man, did I get bamboozled? That is exactly all I had to do was talk to people. It was that simple.
What could we do? I guess you have workflows. These workflows are usually documented in 8-page process documents that are put in a file.
Or they're not. And you're expected to just kind of know what's going on and understand and adapt. And I remember when we worked together, the process changed probably like daily. There was something different. There was some update. Nobody was educated, informed. And I think running a team, I was just so annoyed that my team was spending more time trying to figure out the process and what they were supposed to do and what box they were supposed to check and upload to versus doing the actual work and thinking about what they were doing. They were more stressed about the process. And I've never had so many conversations about freaking process. And that's something that is not one of my favorite topics of conversation. Like, I don't want to figure it out. That's for a PM. Bring something to me that's easy and I will give it my stamp of approval. But it was painful.
You do need a process, right? Especially we spend a lot of time in financial services, and auditors come in and they want to know that you've dotted your I's, crossed your T's, and done all that stuff. So I think like a process exists for good reason a lot of the times, but I think there's ways that you can make your process more efficient. I know one of the ones that we try to move to was this idea of 70-20-10. And that's where you create your core messaging, your image library, your CTAs, right? And you have this library of approved language that you are pulling from. And that should really consist of about 70% of your work, right? And they're in the formats that are already approved. So like your emails, direct mail packages, landing pages, things like that. You've kind of reached the decision with your teams like, hey, these are the formats, these are the approvals, these are your appropriate disclosures. Like I can move one up, one down. I could, change a CTA from learn more to apply now. I could change it from learn more to something else, right? Like we've sort of approved that these are the things that you can use together in these formats, right? And that makes up 70%. Like that right there cleans up your workflow. And where instead you might have people spending 8 hours a day reviewing copy, not everything is going through because it's within these guidelines. And then you could spot check those, right? Because you want to know that's a separate process. You want to know how good you are with that. Then you have 20% of work, which is taking that pre-approved language and maybe you're testing one small thing. A new image that hasn't been approved, a new call to action, something like that. And maybe that call to action, your approved one is apply now, and maybe it goes to apply today, right? Or click here, or something like that, right? But it's smaller changes that, you could say this is all approved content. Look at this piece. That's the piece that's changed. Yep, no issues. Boom, you approve it. You kind of get it through. And then you have this 10%. that is net new. You're playing with language, you're playing with image, maybe you're playing with video, maybe you're doing something else. Maybe it's customer testimonials that are alive, right? And that should be the 10% of the work where you're taking these big swings. You're making an investment in creative. You're taking these big swings. And that's the piece where you want more eyes on it, right? And you want to kind of bring people together to focus on. You still want to have your workflow, but that's the stuff that needs to go through and hopefully will go through rapidly because you're not bogging it down by things that have been approved the same way month over month over month over month.
And I think that's also something to keep the teams engaged as well, right? Like if people are able to move through the 70% of the work or even the 20% that's just being iterated on, you don't have to think so hard. It's not painful to move through. It's quick, it's seamless, it's just smooth sailing. So then you can really dive in and spend time thoughtfully crafting and collaborating and brainstorming whatever it might be on that 10% that you get really excited about. So many internal creative teams and brand teams that I've worked with, they're bored with the work because they're spending time on that 70%, which should almost be automated. It's so templatized, it almost runs itself. But because there's broken processes and disconnect and silos and all these other barriers, it causes us to then spend the time on that work when you want to be doing the 10%.
Or even worse, like arguing over copy that has been used and approved over and over and over again, right? That to me is one of the biggest wastes of marketers' time and one of the biggest causes of dissatisfaction. Like when you're having that conversation of like, tell me what's wrong with it now. It's been approved 17 times. Like, what's wrong with it now? Right. And if there's not a regulatory shift, if there's not, a new something that has passed, we shouldn't be revisiting that copy. And again, that just goes back to somebody who's trying to make their stamp. That's, I think, what frustrates marketers and gets them to the place where they're like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother to write new copy. I know something's going to come back.
How do you avoid that? This just coming out of nowhere and commenting on things that should be pre-approved, automated, the templates. I know from creative and brand visual perspective and even copy, like that's easy for me to approve. I can check the box. But when I'm sending it to a partner or they're sending it to compliance and there's suddenly all this feedback and we get into this cluster of a mess, how do we avoid that?
I think it goes down to those libraries of approved content that you can use in conjunction with one another that doesn't go through, right? Or you can say, here's a piece of creative. I can use these 5 CTAs, right? I'm approving it with these 5 CTAs, so I can do iterative testing, right? I will approve these and use them for the next 6 months and not go through. And I think you really prevent that. It's not to say that your library of messaging doesn't need to go through at some like predetermined and agreed upon time with your approval chain, but I think you just got to get that stuff out. And you got to figure out a way to do it. And now you do need rigor and audits on the back end to make sure people aren't just throwing anything into market, right? But I think if you can get your, second line of defense teams comfortable with not having to review everything and that you have a solid process for that, I think you can actually, one, work on the things that are more important, more outside the box. You eliminate some of these tense conversations of rehashing the same language over and over again. And I think you wind up with a more creative marketing team.
I could not agree more. Yeah.
And people should stay in their lanes as well.
Word of advice. I feel like that's what we should call this episode. People should probably stay in their lanes.
Listen, I'm married to a lawyer. He writes wonderful legal copy, and he actually has a marketing degree, but still, you don't want lawyers writing marketing language. Right. And I know if I asked him, do you want me to whip you up a quick contract that's legally binding? He's probably going to opt to not have me do that.
You could probably do it so well.
It would probably sound better, but definitely not enforceable. So one thing that you always talk about is this idea of sprints. It is a different way of working. And I think when we talk about that 10% of like, how can we effectively work in sprints to keep the creativity, but to make sure that the right people are involved? Can you tell me a little bit about like how that would work?
First of all, I love working in sprints. And I think it really comes from the UX and product ways of working. But I think anyone can really embrace that way of working. So it's not just limited to those teams. When I think of sprints at the beginning of things, everybody gets in the room and you have an understanding of the project. It's really that almost old agency style of everybody gets in the room, we align on the brief, we know what we're going to do.
And this is like everyone who would approve on the workflow, right?
Yeah, everyone who would approve on the workflow, the product owner, the marketing team, the creative, legal and compliance, you bring them in and you're like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is the initiative. You get everybody on the same page. Then you almost set a timeline, whether it's 2 weeks, a week, and you just focus and jam on that project together. There's no line in the sand. There's no like, hey, round one's going to be presented in 7 days from now. You're working collaboratively throughout, so there are no surprises. It's more efficient because if I go and take something away and jam on it and work on it, and I'm like, oh, I crushed it, and then I just send it to you, and you're like, no, I don't like this. It's happened before with PowerPoints. Like that, then I have to go back and do it again. So this way, everybody's involved and can kind of see like, hey, this is what's happening. Are there any flags throughout the way? Because sometimes we have this vision, but once it starts to come to life, it's just like, okay, this is not going to work for X reason. Or there may be some regulatory flags that are raised early on so you can proactively solve for them versus getting it done, going all the way through the end of the process, and then you have to go back. So it's like gets you quicker to market because everybody's on the same page, involved throughout. There's no line in the sand. It's like completely dissolving all silos and just working towards the end product as one team together. You can problem solve together. There's no he said, she said. Everybody is working in the same direction. And there's one end date. So it's just like by the end of this sprint or this period of time, we're going to have this to deliver. There's no in-between dates that you have to worry about. You know how I feel about dates. But just having one versus 7 different dates along the way is easier to keep track of for everybody. And you're just focused on getting it done. You know, you have your start, your finish, everything in between is up to you and your team that you're working with.
So with that, how do you avoid, a lot of people say like workflows get diluted because it's designed by committee. Now, is it because everybody's in the room having the conversation that people feel like they have more of a voice, whether from a design perspective, a marketing perspective with the folks in the room?
Yeah, I think it's like people understand your perspective and where you're coming from and just like why this is something worth testing or why these are the options that you should A/B test against each other. Everybody brings their expertise and there's something to learn from all of the different parties in the room. And I think that when you're able to understand each other and you're able to talk things through, you may not have thought of someone else's point of view. And I think that's ultimately what makes the work better. That's why we work so well together, because so much of what we do is not me just sending you something or you just sending me something. We get online, get on a call, get in person, and we work it out, whether we spend 3 hours, an hour, a full day, but we're doing it together in real time so that we can kind of question things, challenge things, say maybe there's a different perspective or a different angle to take. And ultimately, our work ends up better because of that. And that's where I think the benefits of sprints come, because everybody's on the same page. There's no surprises. And everybody's heard and they feel like they're part of the process. So they're bought into it earlier on because they're invested. This is my project. I'm in on it. The entire process, every step of the way, versus I'm just seeing it. It's not what I asked for. It's not what I wanted. I have a different vision. Go back to the beginning.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate. Yes, but Michaela, we have this workflow where everybody has to sign off in the process. So, I think that's a challenge people will get. Like, oh, it sounds great to have everyone in the room, but when we all go away and we sit in the workflow, people could change their minds. I think part of your sprint, you build in, look, guys, whether it's in the group, you kind of go through, everyone looks at it, and you sort of pass it through the workflow steps real time. Like, is there anything, any concerns, anything else, right? And everyone's kind of checking it off right there. I think that's a fast way to get to approval, right? If everyone's good at it in the room, you throw it in there and then you watch it flip through the workflow in the room and you get that sign off. So you make sure, that you are getting every single box checked so that if you are subject to an audit, you can still make sure that you're being compliant with the processes that you set.
Absolutely. I think that, making sure that kind of upfront and align in the meeting on like, hey, these are my concerns. I'll put them in there so you know what to expect. And there's no, to your point, surprises once you go through the actual process, I think is really the way to go.
I mean, empowerment's big too, right? You have to reduce the number of people in your workflow. Like if you are a creative and maybe you need brand in there, but I can tell you probably if you have good brand guidelines and you've got good creative folks, you probably don't need the head of brand in there approving everything. I think we do that to artificially have people feel value, or somebody's boss who's creating it. Like you should be showing stuff to your boss in a one-on-one. I think we have to reduce the number of cooks in the kitchen. That is a huge thing. Just because you have a workflow that can have 20 people on it doesn't mean you should have a workflow with 20 people.
Mic drop, power statement. I mean, I think about just myself as a leader, I would list out for my team, these are the things I don't need to see. These are the things I need to see once. Once it gets deep in the rounds, like I don't need to see it again. I don't want to see it again. Just keep it moving. I remember when you were my boss, I would ask you that same question, like, what do you want to see? How involved do you want to be? At what stage do you want to see something? I had a boss in the past, she was like, show me stuff when it's 85%. When you think it's at 85%, like ready to go, that's when I want to see it. So when I was at 10, 20, 50, 75, I wouldn't show her anything. I would just make those decisions. I was accountable. I had to own them, whether she loved them or hate them. But then when it was 85, that's when I brought her in. And once you get to know people's taste, what they look for, the feedback that they typically give, you proactively kind of check those boxes so that when it gets to you, you're like, okay, I'm good, versus having all these edits and being like, yo, total miss. I absolutely think that you should not have 20 people on a workflow. And I think working in sprints also gives you that accountability because you as a team are responsible for getting this project through and done and complete. So it's not just, I sent it off, it's out in La La Land. Like I could care less when I send it off who it's with or where it's in the formal process. But like if it's with me and I'm involved and I have to push something forward, that's on me. If it falls, I have to take ownership and accountability for that.
You need that collaboration and you need the conversations. I think a lot of places don't do this enough. Brainstorming sessions on creative, bad idea sessions where you're throwing random ideas up against the board. Like, what if we did this? What if we did this? I think, every 30 bad ideas, you might get one good one out of it that you could try. We shouldn't be hindered by the brief process and the workflow, because if you're just behind your computer jamming on a workflow, like you're not going to bring your team together and do those like bad idea collaborative sessions where you can kind of break out. The other thing that I think workflows do is it gives us a desire to sort of pigeonhole people, right? So we almost want to say, Michaela, you're going to do all this product, right? So that you know it in and out. When you know something in and out, it's great. But sometimes your best ideas come from somebody who is not in the industry or is not doing this. Yeah, there's stuff that they should know, but sometimes you need that shakeup. And I think what workflows tend to lead us to this idea of dedication.
Yeah, that is a scary place to be for me. I've never liked the idea of one-trick ponies that were in one lane, focused either on one product or one channel or one type of deliverable, because A, it burns them out, B, the creative gets super stale, and C, you have no contingency plans. If someone up and quits, leaves. Like that knowledge all goes with them. And so I've always had my teams be versatile and multifunctional and work on anything and everything because that got them closer to the business. They were more engaged because they had more fun doing different things and having different challenges, different problems to solve. And to your point exactly, there was really those fresh perspectives, working with different stakeholders. Stakeholders were getting bored with the work that they were seeing, and it was because it was just the same person doing it and they knew what worked. Same thing with agencies. Like I remember firing an agency because all their work was the same. There was nothing different, campaign after campaign. I'm like, why am I paying for this vanilla work that never changes and doesn't even perform well? We need fresh eyes. We need to shake things up. And as much as dedication seems efficient, I almost think it's counterproductive.
It can be. It can be. It can be. So quickly, everyone's had this, but maybe we could just fire off like a couple of workflow fails we've experienced just for fun, because I bet a lot of our audience has felt them. So like one of mine is 3 weeks to get a tweet approved through a workflow.
I would die. I think another one is a meeting to talk about the meeting before the feedback meeting, to get feedback at the meeting and then give feedback after the meeting. It's just like, how many meetings do we have to get to one solution? Let's just all be in a room, talk about it, and align. It's that simple.
Although on my next one, I actually needed to have a meeting in order to get the feedback, because I had a piece of creative that sat in legal for 2 weeks with no answer, no anything, just because they didn't know what to do with it. They had feedback and they just didn't know what to do with it. So instead of picking up the phone, calling and having a conversation, it sat there and it blew the timeline. It's crazy.
I don't understand that. Like, how do you just not do something with it? Like, you have questions, ask. Everybody has questions. There's no dumb questions. I would rather you ask me, hey, what should I do with this feedback? Even if I'm not the right person to ask, at least we can keep it moving versus just, let's just sit on it. Follow up. Where is it? We just didn't know what to do with it.
All right. So I think we've exhausted the workflow.
I could talk about this for days. Very passionate.
Me too. So I think what we've learned is like workflows should support creativity, not stifle it, right? There are ways that you can work around and within your workflow effectively. Collaboration thrives when there's communication. So don't let commenting in your workflow be the only way that you're communicating. Make sure you're talking to the folks in your workflow to create relationships, establish trust, right? And know where you're coming from and the goals that you're trying to achieve. You're going to need legal in your workflow, but make sure where you can that you make their jobs easy. Get approved libraries of language, right? Get approved libraries of imagery, disclosure libraries, things like that will make them going through it a lot faster. Really limit the folks on your workflow. Just because a workflow says that you could have 20 people, you need your core folks. Who are those core folks? And you empower them. When they're not empowered to make decisions, they're going to second guess themselves, which means they're going to take the safe route with creative. And nobody wants that. And then my biggest one is like, don't confuse the fact that you've built a process with the fact that you've made progress as an organization. Like, just because you have an 8-page process document and you're high-fiving yourself, if it doesn't work, but it's your process, don't stick with it because it doesn't work, right? And you don't want to stay committed to something that doesn't work.
Exactly. And I can't tell you how many times I've been intentionally hired and brought into an organization to literally break the process and throw it away and do something different just because it's not working. And that's how I get through it. It's like you have to break things down and figure out what the problem is and how to get it done quick and efficient. And sometimes it's not the 8,000-page process doc that you've had for years. Just because that's the way things have always been done doesn't mean that's the right way to do it.
It's like a boyfriend who's a really nice guy, but you're just not into them. You got to break up with him. You know what I mean? You feel bad about it, but let's be honest, it ain't working. Well, not me, obviously.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
All right. So we always do our segment before we sign off of brands we love. So Michaela, who are we highlighting this week?
we're highlighting a brand that I believe likely has a good workflow. I don't know this for a fact, but I'll explain why. Highlighting Back Market. First of all, they're a really cool brand. They refurbish tech products and they're very bold with their marketing, kind of challenging the status quo and are environmentally friendly without being moralizing and, making it seem like you should do this, but almost making it like the cool thing to do, making it more savvy versus moralizing, I would say. But they just launched a campaign that is the recession special. I think it was something along those lines. And I say that they must have a good process because it was so timely and relevant. In order to respond to something like that, that's something that's culturally relevant and timely, you have to have a good process. You cannot stand up a campaign that quickly and respond and be on top of that if you don't have a good process. That's kind of my assumption, is that they were able to move this and launch this campaign quickly and also optimize it for channels. You're seeing all of this social stuff about the economy and what's going on in politics and this and that. And so they really had some like channel optimized storytelling and ways to engage. Like, you stopped at that. It stopped me for sure when I was scrolling Instagram and I saw it and I was just like, this is so clever. And even using the code Elon.
And this is it. They did this campaign, refurbished tech. A lot of the tech comes from China. There's no tariffs in China. So it's about the cost of tech is going up, right? And there's been just a ton of conversations about it, all over. And even if this podcast is launching, a couple of weeks after tariffs, all that stuff, like, it's still relevant. But I agree, right? Like, it's in a quick response, like, hey, refurbish your phone because tech's going to get a lot more expensive with these tariffs. Use promo code Elon and get 1% off. Like, it's very creative. I agree with you. The way that they put that out there, the speed, kind of the tongue-in-cheekness, the playing on the political environment is very well done.
I also think it's kind of empathetic too, in a way that is understanding the customer's anxiety about the economic times coming up and providing a solution within that playfulness and wit. I just think it's super well done, and so much of their marketing is well done. So Back Market, you're crushing it. We love what you're doing, and you definitely have a good process and workflow. If you want to drop any tips on what that is, I'm sure a lot of people could learn from it.
Excellent. All right. With that said, visit marketingperspective.com and submit your topic or comment in any of our platforms. If you subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Spotify or wherever you may watch podcasts, we're here, we're listening, we want your topics, we're happy to riff on anything. Thank you so much for joining in. Another episode next week. Bye.
Later.